Back on Morning Line, thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. Nick Barris here, talking the upcoming election. Voter turnout with us. It's Dr. Brian Russell, Political Science Professor at TSU. Good morning to you, sir. So, is it going to be crucial? Both candidates recognize the importance of this. Do you anticipate seeing a higher turnout among minorities this presidential election than last now? What are you seeing at this point?
Well, when you ask this question, there's a couple things in play. And so when we ask this question and think about this, the first thing I'm going to ask when we're saying, do you expect higher turnout and higher voting? In normal situations, that I would say yes in the 2020 elections. We saw an increase in voting. And so in the midterm elections in 2018, there was a big increase in turnout in midterm elections in 2018. And we see an increase in all groups voting in that midterm election. And then so the midterm election in 2018 was one of the highest turnouts in a midterm election if not the highest turnout in midterm elections over the last 30 years. So that, and I would think that the situation that was happening in 2018 between the Democrats and Republicans, I believe that situation has only expanded or been exacerbated, right? And so normally I would say, yes, this is going to be a big turnout election. We would expect dramatic increases in turnout from minority voters. And so that's the expectation going in the type of situation that we have. But then all of a sudden, we have the coronavirus, right? And that's a wild card in the situation, right? How does that going to be? So I would say normally that we would expect voting between of minority Americans participating. I would say that this is a highly salient election. People have been paying attention to it. I'm saying I would expect a high turnout election. The coronavirus is throwing a wrench in that. As we were just discussing, it's affecting how people are going to be voting, mail-in voting, and what happens, right? A week before the election, is there a hot spot in your state, in your town? How does that affect the voting turnout? So I would say, yes, we should expect this to be a high turnout election with a lot of people participating and voting, but then we also have the wild card situation of the coronavirus, and I'm not sure how that is going to play itself out. So I would say, yes, a whole bunch of people are going to vote. This is contested. It's going to be a close race, but I don't know how that is going to be affected by the coronavirus situation. Sure. And how are the rates in your area? And then so that also, and so how are the rates in your area? And so that's going to affect that turnout also. So I would expect, yes, this is going to be a high turnout election. With the caveat is I don't know how the blanket of coronavirus is going to affect that. It's going to be on the...
Yeah. And why is it then, you said earlier, by the way, part of the coronavirus's impact on this is going to be people that maybe opt to vote more by mail or otherwise. Why is it you believe that Republicans are more likely to go to a polling place and Democrats would be more likely to seek to vote by mail?
Well, for one thing, there is an ideological divide in our country, and the parties have been taking different approaches on this situation, right? I would think, right? And then so there is also part of the ideology of we should go vote in person, right? We should be part of a group. We should be part of a civic society, and we should all go vote together. Mm-hmm. So that is part of that situation. And then so I think you're seeing a dramatic increase this time of people willing to do mail-in voting because of the coronavirus. And how it's worked itself out is Democratic voters are much more likely to do that. I think it has to come in a little bit to play about how our country's divided. And the Democrats seem to be embracing the idea of coronavirus restrictions. Not that Republicans aren't doing that, but the difference between the two groups is theoretically Democrats have had maybe more cautious approach, more willing to close down and to try to have certain protections, whereas the conservatives, Republicans tend to be wanting to respect those type of ideas also, but trying to open up back more. And so there's become kind of a polarizing situation of, if you're wearing a mask and those type of things, and how does it affect you ideologically? But so what we end up seeing is in the Republicans, they are saying they're going to vote in person, and Democrats are going to vote by mail. And it's a partisan divide, right? It's a partisan divide. It's like some 80% of Republicans want to vote in person and 80% of Democrats, and I'm just throwing those numbers out there, Democrats want to vote by mail, and this is going to have ramifications, right? The Democrats are overwhelmingly, theoretically, planning on using a way of voting that most people aren't used to, and the Democratic coalition is going to tend to be younger, they're going to tend to be less affluent, are going to tend to be less educated, and if you've never voted by mail before, that brings in a whole bevy of things that can go wrong with voting. So we're going to have a situation where an overwhelming majority of Democrats are going to be voting by mail. Their coalition tends to be younger, less educated, less affluent. Mail-in applications mail-in voting tends to have more mistakes anyway. And the differences in these coalitions, this may lead to some interesting election day results.
Okay, hang on. I was just checking here. We have a caller that wants to maybe ask along those lines, and I know he's got some strong opinions on this. Reverend Enoch Fuzz, good morning to you, sir. Hey, Reverend.
Hey, Nick, can you hear me okay?
I sure can. Go ahead. How are you doing?
Are we on?
Yes.
Hey, Nick?
Yep.
Hello?
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, now I got that. I think I do.
Yep, go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay. We can hear you. All right. Here's a couple of my questions. I want to actually guess if he can verify this. In 2016, I'm hearing that President Trump received the highest percentage of black votes of any president in the modern times. I can't imagine that. And they said it was because people there's this thing against women, that they don't like to see a woman and they don't think that's a woman's place. I know there are a lot of men who think along those lines, and I can see with Vice President Harris, how do you think that might impact the vote among men who just don't think that a woman's place is to be in leadership? I heard a black woman who was like in her 80s from Mississippi saying, I'm not going to vote for a woman in regards to President Clinton. Said God didn't intend for a woman to be the head or the president. So I'm trying to see how that's going to impact things. Blacks who I talk to say they don't trust the mail, that this mail is not going to work. I know that I'm going to vote in person myself and do early voting, and I think that lots of people ought to do the early voting, but at the same time, I'm wondering about Ms. Harris being a candidate, that young people like college students, especially her being a sorority person, aka these young people are going to vote. Possibly, I would hope. You can't tell. Nick, I threw my crystal ball away. I just threw it across the street because that thing was not getting, it was being too wrong when Trump came along. And then I think that Mrs. Clinton, I remember back in 2016, ran out of money in Michigan and Ohio. And so she failed to turn the vote out. I think the candidates got to turn the vote out, and they got to spend money to do that. I think it's going to be a tremendous voter turnout, but it's because of the media, people like Nick doing these kind of shows and talking a lot about the elections, and people getting riled up. But at the same time, I can't tell who's going to win because I've thrown that ball away. So what do you think about, did blacks vote for Trump in a higher percentage in the last election than history? Have you heard of that in modern history? How do you think the woman thing, what white men might think about a woman? That's another group. I know you're not talking about them, but will they resist voting for Joe Biden because of the woman being in the race and what America's feeling towards a woman in leadership nowadays? And I don't think that blacks are going to vote by mail. I think they're not trusting Trump and saying that my vote might not count. That's just my opinion. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Reverend. And you take care of yourself, my friend. Yeah, a couple of good questions to bring up there with regard to the president's black vote first time around. I find it hard to believe that he had gotten a larger portion of African-American votes than, say, well, certainly Obama or even President Clinton.
Well, President Trump didn't get a higher percentage of African American votes than Hillary Clinton, right?
Right.
What the Reverend is referring to right there is, well, first of all, Democratic presidents for candidate are all historically, at least since the 60s, are all going to be overwhelmingly for the Democratic candidate. So African Americans are going to have, voting rates for the for the Democratic candidate, like 85 to 93, 94% of African Americans are going tend to vote for the Democratic candidate. What I think Reverend Fuzz is referring to there is that, and I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head, but I think Trump did better than expected with African Americans, and particularly where Trump did well, and this is where Reverend Fuzz may be referring to, is Trump did particularly well among African American men. And then so I think he got a marginally higher percentage of the African American vote than Romney did, but Trump really made inroads with African American men and got a high, we're still talking about over 80% of African American men voting for Hillary Clinton, but Trump did expand the numbers of black men voting for the Republican president. And President Trump is making the claim and is making a move to try to get more African American votes. I know oftentimes people don't see the connections that Donald Trump has had, but Donald Trump has tried to make, at least in transactional terms, he's tried to reach out in terms of some of his policy positions. Specifically, my fine university, Tennessee State University, our president of our university was, in an Oval Office meeting with the White House where President Trump, signed a package that set up funds for HBCUs over a 10-year period. So when Reverend Fuzz is talking about that, President Trump is making a claim and targeting specifically African American men voters, and has made a push into the African American community, maybe more so than traditional Republican candidates have done. On the issue of Hillary Clinton and on the issue of Kamala Harris, on the issue of people voting for women, we know in our society that there is a percentage of people who are not going to vote for a woman for a position of power like that. And it's not just men that wouldn't do that. It's also some conservative women, some conservative socially women. However, that being said, right, we know that some people in our society wouldn't vote for a woman because of gender bias. Hillary Clinton did actually win more votes. And so I think the Democrats were making the calculus that, yes, we're going to lose some votes because that she is a woman, but that is not going to count us out. And then so Kamala Harris being on the ticket is going to be a very exciting thing for, certain demographic groups in our society, particularly for women. So this is a woman, it's going to be the second woman on a major party presidential ticket, sure. First vice presidential nominee. He was also asking, he made the reference that Kamala Harris is an AKA. She goes to an HBCU. This is particularly exciting for our HBC communities. And so this is going to excite young people. And he was asking about, is it going to excite young people? Coming on the show, I was talking with my students, and of course this is just anecdotal evidence, and I was trying to find out how excited are they about Kamala Harris, and I was kind of a little bit taken aback. They are supportive, but it didn't seem to really have them terribly excited. I have a handful of students that are really excited about it, and I think most of the students are going to support the ticket. Right. And, Kamala Harris does have the history of being Attorney General of California, has a history a little bit of being tough on crime. And so some people in the Democratic coalition find her too hard on crime. And then so she gets a ding a little bit for that. But her HBCU sorority, HBCU graduation, that's exciting for my population of students, for HBCU students on campus. And I don't know, I think they're excited about the issue. I don't know, the reference was made earlier. I don't know that my students are as excited about a Biden-Harris ticket as they were about a Obama-Biden ticket. Yeah. I think I answered some of those questions.
Yeah, no, that's good. Listen, we have to take a break on that. It's still, Professor, I got to tell you, it still boggles my mind that there are people in America where we are today in 2020 that will or will not vote for someone simply because of their skin color or gender. It boggles my mind. The issues, sure, what they stand for, who they are, what kind of people, yes, but just not voting for someone simply because they're female, if that's you, you got a problem. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to have more of our conversation right after this.